Recognizing a quorum, I am calling this meeting of the Cannabis Control Commission to order at 10:30 a.m. on January 23rd, 2018. Can I ask, is anybody recording this meeting? As people are recording this meeting, let me announce to the public that this meeting is being recorded. Can everybody hear me in the back? Thank you. Can I ask the commissioners please to turn on their mics when they're speaking? Thanks very much. So let me go through the agenda and then we'll get started. We've just done the call to order. I have a few comments and updates that I'll make. We want to talk about minutes from previous meetings, although we will not cover the approval of any minutes. I just want to give everybody an update on where we are on that. We have one potential addition to our draft regulations that Commissioner McBride is going to walk us through, and then we'll discuss and take a vote on it. We want to give an update on where we are in terms of constituting the Citizens Review Committee, which was part of our draft regulations. We also want to begin the discussion of the location of the permanent office for the Commission. Right now we are in this building until May of 2019, and we need to begin the process immediately of deciding on where we want to locate and working with DCAM to get new permanent office space in time for the end of this lease. At the request of Commissioner Title, I've left some time for public comments or questions at the end of this meeting, and then we can talk about any new business. But that's the agenda. I have three announcements or three topics I want to raise with some help from the Commission and from Sean. First and most important, I'd like to welcome the newest member of our team. Christine Bailey joined us yesterday as our General Counsel. I think that it's important to note now that we have 9 people, of which 5 are lawyers. So once again, the lawyers are in charge. Before it was tied 4-4, but now we have 5 lawyers and 4 non-lawyers. All kidding aside, though, we're delighted to have Christine. I think she's going to be an extraordinary addition to the team. Why don't you raise your hand so everybody knows you? And Sean, you want to talk a little bit about Christine and her background?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I should note, too, that we have 9 folks and 5 are also commissioners. So just something to be mindful
as it should
of.
be.
Yeah, exactly.
I can help you if you need therapy.
Appreciate that. So yes, I agree. We're excited to have Christine join us. She comes from us most recently as a senior staff counsel to the Supreme Judicial Court, and previous to that served as an assistant attorney general in the Administrative Law Division in the Attorney General's Office. So very excited to have her on board. Very excited to get underway and add her to our team, our growing team.
Great. Thank you very much. Second, also, Sean, we're going to post one additional job posting this week, so could you just update people on that?
Sure, that's correct. So I should also remind folks that still open until Friday is the position of Chief of Investigations and Enforcement, and then this week we intend to post the position of Research Director.
Which has been previously approved by the Commission.
It has been, that's correct. And it will be posted later on this week. It's expected to close likely on February 9th.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. And thanks again for your focus on getting us staffed up. The third topic before we get into the agenda is I'd like to ask Commissioner Doyle to just give us a brief update. She led a workshop at the annual meeting of the Mass Municipal Association last Friday. We've talked a lot about our desire to collaborate with the cities and towns around the state, make sure that we're sharing information and understanding concerns, and this was a major step in that. My understanding is that over 200 people showed up for this workshop. I believe it was because Commissioner Doyle was a real draw. She says actually it was the topic that brought those people. We can debate that, but I thought it would be a good idea for Commissioner Doyle to just give a brief update about the presentation and about the conversation. So thank you, Commissioner Doyle.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, on Friday, January 18th, I spoke at a workshop on the adult use of marijuana at the annual trade show for the Mass Municipal Association. And I'd like to thank David Lakeman and his team for putting together such a great workshop. We had John Goldrosen, who is currently, I believe, the town council at the town of Braintree as moderator. We had Margaret Hurley from the Attorney General's office and Katie Lockman of KP Law presenting on how the adult use of marijuana laws and municipalities intersect. It was a great talk. It was an overflow crowd. We literally had people standing in the hallway, and we made ourselves.
And you sure it wasn't all about coming to see you?
Pretty positive, yeah. And I also walked around the floor during the convention during the day and stopped and answered questions where people had questions. So it was a very productive day. I want to thank my co-speakers for doing such an excellent job, and further invite municipalities to engage with the Cannabis Control Commission. We do want to hear from them, both in response to the draft regulations and then going forward as we implement the adult use of marijuana laws.
Great, thank you for doing that. Okay, let's then move into the actual agenda, talking about minutes from previous meetings. So at our last meeting, we discussed, voted on, and approved minutes from December 11th, which was the first of 4 consecutive days that we had policy discussions with respect to the draft regulations. We are working on the next 3 days, December 12th, 13th, and 14th. They are very long, dense, and unfortunately not great recordings that we're trying to transcribe. We are pretty confident, I will say with a high degree of confidence, but not certainty, that at next week's meeting we'll be able to do the 12th and the 13th.
Yes.
So we're working as hard as we can on this. It really is painstaking work, and we're anxious to stay as current as we possibly can. But we have no minutes to discuss today, but we will do so next week. And as I said, hopefully get the 12th and the 13th done next week. So that's it for minutes. Next topic is a discussion of possible additions to our draft regulations. There is one topic that we'd like to bring up. Commissioner McBride will lead us through this conversation, which is the registration of agents in laboratories. We will discuss it the same way we did all the rest of our draft regulations back in December. And after we've had discussion and questions, we'll ask for a motion to approve. So, Commissioner McBride, will you walk us through this, please?
Sure. So this was actually a regulation that was drafted in December, but it was kind of lost in the shuffle as we were going through our policy discussions of talking about it. So the marijuana establishment agents, there's a registration process that we established for those individuals. This is a regulation that would establish the same process for laboratory agents. It's separate from the marijuana establishment agents just because there are some explicit statutory requirements that need to be included, and so we found it might be easier to sort of bifurcate and have this as its own regulation. So a laboratory agent is defined as an employee or an independent testing laboratory who transports, possesses, or tests marijuana for the purpose of testing in compliance with 935 CMR 500, and it's specifically 500.160. Excuse me. So as I just talked about, there's a requirement of registration with the Commission. It's the same as marijuana establishment agents, but because of the specific requirements, we are including those in the regulation, and those 2 specific requirements from Chapter 55 of the Acts of 2017 are first a mandatory bar against anyone convicted of a felony drug offense, and that is found in General Law Chapter 94G, Section 15B5. And then there is the requirement of fingerprinting. So we have a requirement of fingerprinting for licensees in the statute, and we also have one that is just for laboratory agents, not marijuana establishment agents, but laboratory agents, and that is in Section 21 of Chapter 94G. In addition to that, we have an explicit code of conduct that is required for lab agents, which is separate and apart from marijuana establishment agents. Those include provisions that are, there's an anti-bribery provision that says that lab agents are prohibited from receiving any direct or indirect compensation in addition to that which they receive to perform their duties. And there's a prevention of divided loyalties provision, which states that lab agents are prohibited from having a financial interest or being employed by a marijuana establishment while they're also employed by an independent testing laboratory. So those are given to us in the statute. The regulation is drafted to reflect that. If the commissioners look at the regulation, you'll see that it follows the same and adopts much of the same language as the marijuana establishment agents, except for kind of these explicit provisions. So
this was circulated earlier. Have the commissioners had a chance to review the language? Are there any questions or comments on the language? Or on
One question. The exclusion for felony drug offenses, I would suggest we leave that out because there's currently a contradiction in Chapter 55 where it does mandate that, but at the same time it mandates that marijuana establishment agents can't be prohibited on a felony drug offense. And so I think we should wait until that's clarified before we put it in a regulation.
Okay, but this is explicitly for the laboratory agents, and those are pulled out from the marijuana establishment agents as we've defined that in our regulations and as it's sort of used throughout the statute. So I'm a little, I guess, because the statute controls and tells us what we need to take into consideration when we're determining suitability for this particular type of registration, I am fairly certain that we can't avoid it. It's explicit in the statute for laboratory agents.
But the statute says both, that for lab agents it has that part, but then it also says that agents can't be excluded based on that. It says both and they contradict each other.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm trying to look it up just so I can see what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think we're going to get some work for our new general counsel.
Commissioner Title, can I just ask, so are we referring to the section that says that they can't be barred on the basis of a marijuana conviction except if it's distribution to a minor? I just want to make sure I'm following. Okay, let's see if I can find that. One section in 4A.5 that talks about, that helps, it's subsection 3, the little Roman numbers. I swear the chairman laughs at me because I'm having technical difficulties again.
What a surprise.
Yeah, 3.
Well, do you want to do it quick?
If we can do it quickly, that's fine. But I'm happy to defer this
Well,
conversation.
do you want to do a quick recess so we can
our general counsel to weigh in and bring it on next week's agenda, unless we can resolve this quickly. Doesn't sound like Commissioner Title feels comfortable.
Yeah, we could.
Yeah, my recommendation, unless people disagree,
Sure.
is we'll ask our general counsel to form an opinion and put it on the agenda for next week. Is that okay with you, Commissioner Brunson? We have time on the agenda, so I just didn't want to.
Sure. I mean, I'm fairly confident that if we took a 5-minute recess, we could probably.
I'm happy.
But if you want to.
No, if you're confident that would resolve it, then let's take a 5-minute recess. I'm absolutely fine with that. I'd rather not keep deferring stuff. So if we can resolve it with a 5-minute.
Yeah, let's do a 5-minute recess.
So we're recessed for 5 minutes. We are reconvened. If there is no further discussion, then I think we're prepared to have a motion to approve this.
I think we should probably talk about what in the conversation with the general counsel, what we determined, and my interpretation of the statute is that because there is an explicit requirement that no one shall be a laboratory agent who has been convicted of a felony drug offense, and that appears right in section 15 of chapter 94G, subsection 5. That explicit requirement, it subsumes the general requirement that deals with marijuana establishment agents, and what Commissioner Title correctly points out are the bars on what can be considered when making a suitability determination about marijuana establishment agents. So here we have a specific requirement and a specific prohibition. So that's why the regulation was drafted to reflect what is in the statute. So that is the resolution and I guess the determination that I would ask for the commission to adopt, and I think that that's the question that's on the table.
Before I ask for a motion, any other comments or questions? Great, then can I have a motion to approve the recommendation of Commissioner McBride?
So moved.
Let the record show that Commissioner Doyle made the motion to approve. Commissioner Flanagan seconded the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Abstain. Okay. So let the record show that the motion to approve is carried 4-0 with one abstention, the abstention being Commissioner Title. Thank you very much. I wanted to, as the next topic, talk about the Citizens Review Committee, which was part of our draft regulations. Just for everybody's recollection, we agreed that we would appoint this, or excuse me, this commission would be appointed by our executive director, that each of the commissioners, other than myself, would make 2 nominations for this committee, and that I would make 1. I wanted to just give an update. I think we still have some more work to do on this, so we're not going to finalize this today again. I hate to keep putting things off, but I want to do this right, so we're going to put this on the agenda for next week. I wanted to give an update of where we are, which is, I think we have a total of 7. Well, actually, Sean, why don't you give us an update of where we are?
Sure. So I know that conversations are ongoing amongst the commissioners, and with an effort to finalize recommendations or nominations to me. We do have, I think, a good slate thus far, but until the group is complete, we've chosen to hold off until we can announce everybody at once and give the commissioners some time. Again, they're actively recruiting folks, engaging folks, and want to make sure that folks that would be serving in this capacity understand that exactly what the Citizen Review Committee entails, and that they are aware that they'll be discussed publicly as well. So we do have a good amount so far, but want it to be complete before announcing.
Okay. Any of the commissioners feel like they'll be unable to come up with the names, need any help, or we're confident with the process? Okay. I would want to raise one issue with respect to the Citizens Review Committee, which is I believe it's imperative that there is some explicit linkage between the Citizens Review Committee and the Commission. And I think there are kind of 2 generic ways that we can do that. I'd like to get the commissioners to weigh in on this. One is to do something comparable to what we did with the Cannabis Advisory Board, which is that we had an explicit assignment for one commissioner to be a liaison to each of the subcommittees. They were explicitly not part of the subcommittees, but served as liaison between the commission and the advisory board. I'd like to propose that at least we do that and have one of the commissioners play an explicit liaison role with this review committee. An alternative, which I suspect I'm going to get pushback on, but I wanted to raise it anyway, is to actually have one of the 9 seats of the review board held by one of the commissioners to be determined. So that would be my recommendation, but at the very minimum I feel that it's imperative that we at least have the explicit liaison that I discussed, but I wanted to get feedback and thoughts from the other commissioners.
Mr. Chairman, in full disclosure, I voted against the Citizens Committee. I didn't think we needed it, but now that it's here, I really think that with only 9 members, they have access to the commission, and they will be communicating with us. That I'm not too sure we need to add another role for a commissioner to be a part of the committee itself. You know, I don't have a problem with any of us or all of us talking, especially to the people that we've appointed, I just feel as though that there's a lot of work to do, and this just keeps adding to it. And I'm not too sure what we're going to get out of it, considering that they're going to be referring to us and telling us what they think and how we're doing anyway. I'm not too sure it needs to be so formalized.
Okay. Other comments?
I'm comfortable. Sorry. I'm comfortable with the liaison idea. I'm not comfortable with a commissioner serving on the committee. I think the role of the committee is to make recommendations to the commissioners. So having a commissioner serve on the committee just seems awkward.
Okay. Commissioner McBride?
I think I would just echo what Commissioners Flanagan and Doyle
I don't think they said the same thing.
said. Well, so I think that on the matter of having a member of the commission on the review committee, because they are reviewing the work that we are doing, I actually think that it potentially puts the members of that committee in a little bit of an awkward position. And I think that having a liaison makes perfect sense.
Okay.
But I don't think that we need to have a
Okay.
member on the committee.
Commissioner Tyler?
I agree with Commissioner Doyle and Commissioner McBride.
Okay. So when, thank you. It sounds like there's a majority that thinks the liaison makes sense. I'm going to suggest that when we hopefully finalize the membership of the committee next week, we can also discuss which commissioner should serve as liaison, recognizing Commissioner Flanagan's perspective as well. We can discuss whether it's necessary or not. But at a minimum, I'd like to have a conversation when we finalize this list next Tuesday. Okay. So thank you for your input. I don't think any further conversation is necessary on this topic right now, but we will we'll hopefully finalize this next Tuesday. Next agenda item is to start the discussion about finding permanent space for the commission. My intention here is to start the conversation and agree on a process to go forward to make a decision, but I do not believe we should try to make a decision today. I wanted to recognize two people that are in the audience, Ginny Platt and Martha Goldsmith from DCAM. You can raise your hands. First of all, I want to thank the two of them and then DCAM more broadly for their help in getting us into this building for temporary space. We really appreciate that. And every day we come into the office and we smile because we're in this building and we're not in cubicles in One Ashburton. So thank you very much for your help in that. And also thank you for your help in starting to work with us on the permanent space for the commission. Again, we are in this building until the end of May 2019, which gives us pretty much just about enough time to start the process to finalize and negotiate a lease for permanent space for the commission. So I wanted to get the topic on the agenda today to start the conversation, and then, as I said, get agreement on a process going forward to resolve this. There's a couple things that I'd like to review, or I'd like to ask Sean to review. The first is just a timeline. We've been told by DCAM it's a 15-month process. There are a number of steps that have to happen along the way, but there are also some very specific decisions that the commission has to make in this process. So I thought the first order of business would be just to talk about the timeline and talk about the role of the commission and the specific decisions that the commission has to make in this process. So Sean. Sorry, this is pretty small, but
it is. So, the process to secure permanent space, given that we are in this facility through the end of May of 19, really should begin in earnest now to anticipate a significant lead time of both a search for respondents to a potential an RFP, but then also to, as we identify the space, to then build out that space and ensure that everything is ready to go for May of 19 for us to occupy, and in the event that we need to leave this facility, to make sure that transition can occur seamlessly. So with that in mind, we do need to issue an RFP to identify potential search areas, potential criteria or amenities that would be necessary, for instance, public meeting space and the like. In order to do that, we have to put together what is called a Form 1 and work with DCAM in developing that, which identifies our needs. That'll be then baked into an RFP. The RFP will be published by DCAM. And I want to give DCAM a lot of credit here. They are really serving as a partner in this search and serve really in the driver's seat for making sure that things our milestones are met. So All in all, if we begin now, as the schedule indicates that you have in front of you as well as on the screen, that will bring us to May of 19. There are a number of steps that I think are formal commission steps, one being the issuance of the RFP, then the next part being the actual selection of a location. The majority of other steps I believe can be handled administratively amongst commission staff, and really us leading that effort with commission involvement, but not a formal commission public meeting process. So if we were to issue an RFP by early March, which is what the schedule indicates, we can then get submissions or get the notice out, begin to review responses, conduct some site visits, which could put us on track for, and should put us on track for, an eventual selection by July of this year. Realizing that we have a lot going on at the commission level between now and July of this year, this is ambitious. At the same time, I believe it does get us on track for potentially occupying a space, given that we then have to agree to a lease and negotiate and execute that, which could take another few months, and then we have to begin, if there's any design or build up that's necessary, which I believe is likely, that could take a number of weeks as well. So, of course, any questions that the commission may have, I'm happy to answer. We do have the folks from DCAM that have been gracious enough to join us as well.
Thank you, Sean. Any questions on the timeline? Okay. Given this timeline, I thought that it would be appropriate to get a couple of conversations started. And as I said, I don't expect to resolve this today, but I wanted to raise a couple of topics for the commission to think about and then come back and discuss next week. The first of them are the criteria. We have a wide range of potential locations for this office, which I'll share on the next slide and make sure it's a complete list. But I think that the way that we can evaluate those alternative locations and give guidance to DCAM starts with agreeing on what are the criteria for picking permanent space, and this is meant to be stimulus to that conversation. It's not meant to be the definitive list, nor is it meant to be something that we agree on today, but what I thought I would do is put up these potential criteria, discuss them, make sure that people have a chance to think about them, make suggestions if you think we're missing any criteria, and then the second step is go through the potential locations and come back with the help of DCAM with an evaluation of those potential locations against the agreed upon criteria. So the first order of business is just to talk about these criteria, and they're not meant to be in order of importance. We can agree when we come back to discuss this next week, we can agree to give them different weighting. But I just wanted to at least start the process of talking about what the criteria are and get people's input on that. First is clearly the cost, and as we look at alternative locations, I suspect, and this is certainly consistent with what we're hearing from DCAM, there's going to be significant differences in cost depending on what location we pick. Availability of suitable office space has at least two dimensions to it. One is Class 1 buildings, and help me out, Ginny and Martha, if I'm wrong. Class 1 buildings essentially have doormen and security, or you want to actually elucidate that?
I think I'm the director of the leasing office at the Division of Capital Asset Management, and I think discussions we've had with the executive director and chairman of the Cannabis Commission, when we look for office space, we look for a landlord to provide the necessary services. So I think that's really what's being referred to, that there would be adequate security at the building. The landlord would provide the janitorial services and other services associated with it.
So availability of office facilities that meet those criteria is one dimension of availability. The second dimension of availability, and this is not meant to be a complete list, but are specific requirements that we have as a commission, and certainly one of them is I think that we need public meeting facility availability, hopefully as nice as what the Gaming Commission has. We need parking. The second criterion, we can subdivide it, is with respect to the availability of the kind of buildings that we need in the various locations that we're considering. Third, and in my opinion, very, very important, is accessibility, both to the public as well as to current staff and to potential staff. I think one of the things that we want to ensure is that we're picking a place that will not preclude us from getting the best possible people to join the staff. And so I think accessibility both for public and for our staff is a critical dimension. There are specific criteria that DCAM has suggested with respect to accessibility in terms of distance from MTA and other public transportation options, which we can explicitly put in our criteria in evaluating this. But accessibility is important. And the executive director and I have had a number of conversations about the kind of agency we're trying to build and the kind of 21st century state agency, and I believe our choice of office space is relevant to our ability to attain that. And a couple of things that are important, and again, maybe there's some other dimensions as well, are we are a statewide agency. We are not a Boston agency, and so I think that's important. I think that we all take very seriously the legislative commitment that we have to ensure the participation of disproportionately impacted communities in this new industry, and our office location is one relevant part of that. We want to be the model state agency, and I think that has some requirements with respect to the kind of office that we have and the kind of appearance and optics that it has in terms of ease of, not just ease of access by public transportation, but how the public interacts with us, and choosing office space that makes it easier and more user-friendly to interact with us. So consistency with our mission, to me, is another important criterion. That's all I got so far. Again, I'm not looking to close on this as much as raise these and get any thoughts that people have about other criteria that you think might be part of the process of making a location decision. You're on.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll check for you because I know you can't see past your computer.
Thank you. Under accessibility, you talked about the public and staff. I would also say the other agencies that we need to work with on a regular basis.
I think that's a good point. Other suggestions? Am I missing anything here?
I think this is great. You mentioned proximity to the T. I would just add that under specific requirements.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll flesh out accessibility with those specific requirements. And again, DCAM, to their credit, they have some very explicit criteria. It's half mile from an MTA stop, and I mean we'll flesh that out. Okay, so I think that's important. Anything else that you think I'm missing here? Okay. So again, the intent would be with these criteria, we'll flesh them out the way that you suggested, Commissioner Title and Commissioner Doyle. We'll flesh these out, and then the next slide will be potential locations. And I want to ensure that we have a complete list of potential locations, that I haven't missed anything. And pending that conversation, then I'll work with the executive director to lay out those alternative locations against the criteria that we just talked about, and present that, or ask Sean to present that back to the group next week.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask one question?
Sure. Just one?
Yeah, for now. You're lucky. When we talk about participation by disproportionately impacted communities, are we using the list of 29 that we've identified? Or are we using a different list? I guess I'm just trying to think of geographically what we're talking about. And I think if we're going to define disproportionately impacted communities, then that would be helpful for this purpose.
I guess I don't see any reason to have a different list than what we talked about and approved the last meeting.
That's helpful.
Whenever that was, yeah, I think that there should be only one list of disproportionately impacted communities for all purposes.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
okay, so that being said, again, this I appreciate the help of DCAM in putting this together. I am looking for errors of omission here rather than errors of commission, although if anybody thinks any of these options are completely unacceptable, we can probably eliminate them, but more, I just want to make sure that I'm not missing any potential here. And so there's clearly downtown Boston. There are other parts of Boston, and I'm not trying to be exclusive with my EGs here, I'm just trying to give examples. So Roxbury would be an example of other parts of Boston other than downtown. There are the northern burbs, and a couple of examples would be Malden or Somerville. There are the southern burbs, examples again, Quincy and Braintree. There's the kind of 128 belt, and again, not inclusively, but including things like Waltham or Burlington along 128, and the final one that I've listed is a little further out, so in the kind of Metro West area between 128 and 495, examples being Framingham or Westboro. And again, not meant to be inclusive, so please, no city or town that was omitted from this list, send me a nasty letter or an email. But the other thing, and I put it up for consideration, is I think we also need to have a conversation about whether we want a satellite office. And I can think of a couple reasons for having a satellite office. One is just to show that we're a statewide agency, which I think is important. Two is a significant percentage of our staff are going to be inspection personnel and enforcement personnel, and they're going to be traveling all over the state, and forcing them to travel all over the state from a place close into Boston is probably not optimal. So my suggestion, and again we can talk about this and agree on it next week, is my suggestion is that we consider seriously having a satellite office probably someplace out in the western part of the state. But back to this list, are there any locations you think that are omitted from this list that should be considered? Leominster?
No. You're lucky if you get on the train to Leominster. I think for conversation purposes, Worcester needs to be considered, considering it is on a rail. It is the center of the state. It's the second largest city in the Commonwealth. And given the fact that a large majority of the people reaching out to us are farmers from the West, we need to keep in mind, satellite office or not, that there is a whole 300 miles west of Central Mass to go.
300 miles west?
Yeah, there's at least 2 something to get to the Berkshires.
I am happy to put Worcester on the list. I think it's a great suggestion.
So I think
I do question your geography. I don't think that Massachusetts is 300 miles long, is it?
Well, it's 2 something.
I don't know why you're looking at me.
We're going down. I was looking at you because I was expecting to hear
Right, if you want to do it in hours, it's like 3.5, 4 hours.
If you want to get down this rabbit hole,
yeah.
that's what I was waiting for you to say, Commissioner McBride.
So I mean,
I think it's a great point.
I just think that the people from the 413 area, and because when people say west, they think of my area, which there's more west than Central Mass. I think it just needs to be considered.
So I'll put Worcester on the list and evaluate it upon the against the agreed upon criteria. Thank you. Any other omissions? So I think this. Thank you. So I commit to working with Sean over the next week prior to our next public meeting, coming back with a list of these locations, including Worcester, evaluated against the criteria that we agreed upon. And I'm hopeful that if we can't make a single location decision, we can at least pare the list down to give DCAM a little bit more of a focused universe to search for. Because I think if we give them this entire list, it's not going to yield results. So I think we at least need to pare this list down, if not pick one specific location. Go ahead, Commissioner McBride.
I just have a question. I don't know if this is something that needs to be answered later. Or maybe I can pose it to the folks from DCAM. How do we determine what the appropriate square footage and sort of the size of office is, given that I think I don't know, I'm not going to speak for everyone. I am anticipating that a sizable number of people from the commission are going to be out in the field, are going to be working remotely, right, at times. So how do we
So we have talked about that with DCAM, so why don't you address that, Sean?
Sure, and Martha or Jenny can certainly correct me if I'm wrong. The biggest factor for determining appropriate square footage would be your head count and allocating a certain head or square footage per member, per staff member. And then, of course, you can take into effect the need for public meeting space or the like. But that's the exercise of filling out that Form 1 determines what your expected head count is, not just, for instance, next year or this, May of 19, but May of the term of the lease. If you expect to grow rapidly or grow a lot significantly, you need to anticipate it in that document to capture what your appropriate head count would be.
But I also think that we'll reflect in that document our expectation in terms of what that head count looks like, not just in total, but also what percentage of it will be enforcement personnel, and therefore, and particularly, I think if we can simultaneously agree that we will have a satellite office, I think we can adjust the head count, the total head count appropriately to reflect that.
And again, this may be for a later date and time, but given that we don't yet know really how many applications, how many licenses we're going to have, right, and how we think we know at this point where we're probably going to be a couple of years from now, but I would presume that part of what we need to build in here is also the idea that we could be growing, right? I mean, this could be something. We don't want to be in a space where all of a sudden, within a couple of years, we can't knock down a wall and build into the next area, right? And I think that that's something that is.
I think you just suggested. I think it's right. And I think what you've done is suggested an additional criterion, which is flexibility and expansion opportunity.
So I agree. I think in developing that Form 1, what is I think also critical is a sense of organizational charge as a result, because your headcount is going to be a myriad of staff. So some require offices versus workstations or cubicles, and trying to anticipate those needs as well is important. So the earliest exercise being that Form 1 is really going to guide the rest of the process moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And also critical is once proposals come in, actually going out and seeing the space and making sure that whether it's flexible or room for growth. And of course, having partners like DCAM, they're certainly helpful in identifying if something is really tight or is something that we should be thinking of. Already they've been giving me a lot of ideas and thoughts about how to anticipate any potential curveballs, like for instance our growth or the rapid.
Well, and not to mention integrating medical marijuana at some point in 2018,
right,
and the staffing requirements involved in that.
That is something that's on our mind.
Yeah. So just to summarize, what I will do working with Sean over the next week is add Worcester to the list of potential locations, add the criterion suggested by Commissioner Doyle about accessibility to other state agencies, add Commissioner Title's request to be very explicit about accessibility and location vis-a-vis public transportation, take the list of locations, apply those criteria, and probably just do like stoplight chart, red, yellow, and green, rather than trying to do anything that's falsely quantitative, and then come back in and then ask Sean to present those locations against those criteria and have a discussion next week, which hopefully will lead to a decision to give guidance to DCAM in terms of where we're looking to locate our permanent facility. And I think it's important that we make that decision quickly, given the timeline that Sean went through, just so that we can hit that May 2019 deadline. Any other questions or comments on this? Okay, thanks. We're done with the formal part of the agenda, other than, as again, at the request of Commissioner Tyler, which I certainly supported. I thought was a good idea. I'd like to open this if there are any questions from the public or for the Commission. Jeremiah? Can you just make sure that everybody can hear you?
So I have just a little comment and I have two questions. So.
Okay.
My name is Jeremiah McKinnon. I've been a medical marijuana patient in Massachusetts since 2015. My immediate family are patients, and I've also befriended dozens of medical marijuana patients through my advocacy on this matter. And I'd like to bring to the Commission's attention a very serious concern, which I am not alone in feeling that this has not been given the appropriate respect and attention that it deserves. As a patient, I rely on the existing 18 dispensaries for tax-free and lab-tested safe medicine. Those 18 open dispensaries are operated by 13 separate companies. There are over 27,000 patients like me who use the dispensary in any given month. That is 60% of the card-holding patients currently in the medical marijuana program. And over 29,000 ounces were sold to patients in the program last month in December. It is understood that the only way the adult use industry could begin sales in July is if the existing medical infrastructure was utilized. Those operating and dispensing will be able to apply for priority April 1st to April 15th. But I don't think there's any argument that the demand for marijuana, both medical and recreational, far exceeds what is available in the market today in Massachusetts. There will be shortages for consumers in July. Because the priority applicants will be co-located or dual licensed businesses, if licensed by the Commission, the legislature put in the statutory requirement for the Commission to develop requirements and standards sufficient to ensure for the virtual separation of marijuana cultivated, delivered, and sold by a licensee that is also licensed as a medical marijuana treatment center. But I have not heard from this Commission discuss, and I do not believe that the draft regulations address guidelines to prevent the very real possibility that co-located medical and adult use facilities will sell out of all inventory in July, due to 100% of the available supply being able to be purchased by large lines of consumers. A first-come, first-served system where consumers could buy out all the supply from patients is not humanitarian. Maybe you've heard Nevada's launch of retail sales caused a shortage and state of emergency because they had an almost entirely combined supply chain for co-located medical and adult use businesses. California, who has 66 distribution companies, and began retail sales at the beginning of this year. Some are calling the shortage situation unfolding there a permitting crisis. But both of their medical marijuana markets were much more established than ours currently is. In the case of our medical program, still not being fully implemented, with only 13 operating companies, yet to have one operating in each county. Does the Commission feel confident that the draft regulations ensure patient supply is protected and sufficient supply continues to be available for patients in July, August, September, and not being negatively impacted in July by a rollout with no explicit patient protection? And the follow-up on that is, I and many others do not see the draft regulations having a set date for general applications to begin for small business licenses like craft cooperatives, new cultivators, manufacturers, and micro businesses who can actually contribute to the supply shortage that we will see in July. So I was wondering when that date might be for general applications as a follow-up to my first question. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just comment in general. Thank you for the comment. We are committed as a commission to ensure that the concerns that you have are addressed. I will certainly say that. We can debate what more we need to do, and we will continue to discuss and debate and make sure that we honor that commitment. But there's no question that we're committed to avoid the issue that you just raised. Any additional comments? You're on.
Okay, thank you. No, I echo the statement of the chairman that these are issues that we very much care about. I, in particular, obviously coming from the medical use of marijuana program, want to ensure that patients have adequate access to their medicine. So it's certainly something that we are continuing to look at, and we will take a look at the issues that you've raised here today and evaluate them as part of our approach to reaching to the final regulations in March.
Thank you. Commissioner Tao?
Thank you for your comments. To directly answer your question as to whether I feel comfortable that we've adequately addressed that concern, the answer is no, I don't, but I do feel confident that we will as this process moves forward.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, thank you.
And then just the second question on the general application, when that might begin for people to apply?
Let's take that one.
Sure. I think we're still looking at all the things around the application process. Obviously, we've put some very comprehensive regulations in place, but we have to now look at not only getting to a final regulation place, but also building the application process itself. So your point is well taken, and we will definitely look at that as part of that process.
Thank you very much.
Any other question? Yes?
So in the draft regulations, it brings up that the applicants need to have community outreach meetings. But if we're starting July 1st, my name is Kamani Jefferson.
Sorry, I should have said
Sorry, Kamani Jefferson.
Thank you.
With Mass Consumer Council. I have a question around the community outreach meetings. It says that we're supposed to start July 1st, but applicants are supposed to have community outreach meetings before. So I'm curious, how would that work if we plan, if I guess the medical treatment centers are supposed to convert, are they supposed to be planning these community outreach meetings now? I'm just curious how that transition will happen on July 1st.
Thank you for that question. In answer to that, I would say yes. It's probably a very good idea to read the draft regulations. They will give you the signposts if you are considering filing an application, regardless of whether you are what priority category you fall into. They're going to tell you generally what I think our process is going to look like, notwithstanding that we very well may be tweaking things as we come back after we have the public hearings. On the community outreach hearings, I would say yes, between in this period of time, it's probably a good idea for applicants to be thinking about how they're going to pull those hearings together and to put that process into motion. I think as a commission, we are going to be trying in the intervening months now, between now and April and July, certainly, to be providing as much information as we can to potential applicants as to what they can anticipate, so that everyone is able to work towards getting their applications completed and doing it in a timely in an organized manner, and we're going to try to be as helpful as we can, I think, in that regard.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. As you know, we're going to be going around the state for the first 2 weeks of February, so there'll be plenty of additional opportunities to offer comments to the Commission and to our process. I am not aware of any additional agenda items that I was not aware of at the time that we posted this agenda. The next meeting date will be a week from today, the 30th of January, 10:30 a.m., right here in the Gaming Commission offices. There being no further business in front of the Commission, I am adjourning this meeting as of 11:26 a.m. on January 23rd. Thank you very much.